watch live if they don't have Zoom?
We just tell them to go to our website. I've put it on the front page of the website this time. So just go to shorelineinfinity.com and they'll see
Okay.
the video there on the home page.
Okay. So I'm just going to share a tweet with you all, and then if any of you do want to tweet it, you can just copy and paste it, and then everyone
Yeah, please.
who isn't on Zoom can then just watch along.
Yeah.
The benefit of being on Zoom is that they can ask questions in the and like leave comments in the chat. But otherwise, there's not a lot of difference.
Yeah, I should have really thought for someone to take over the Glasgow 2024 account tonight. Never mind. I can multitask.
We'll manage, I'm sure. Actually, I will ask people. I'll make a little note to ask people to tweet about it. I usually do. Yes, so I do have a little note to myself to ask anyone watching. They can tweet about it and use the hashtag Event Horizon. So hopefully they'll leave some comments on there saying how much they're enjoying it and so on. Are there any questions before? Because I think we should start in a minute. I will ask people.
Right. We are now live on YouTube. We're now live on YouTube. Hello, world. Hello?
Hello.
Okay.
If everything's running, Noel, should we let people in?
Sorry, did I miss some of that? I was sitting up on YouTube. I came back here all quiet. I thought I'd said something I hadn't been.
Oh no.
Yeah, I'm just triple checking things as usual. Everything's recording. Everyone's happy, I presume. You're looking good, people. It looks really good, actually.
Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is if I need to send you a message for some reason, such as you're really quiet or something like that, or your mic's not working, or I'll type to you in the chat. So I'll send you a private message if there's anything. It should be fine, but just keep a vague eye on it just in case. And you can do the same to me if you need to ask anything throughout. Okay?
Okay. Right, I'm about to let them all in, shall I? Gosh, there's quite a crowd out there. Oh, right, here we go. There they go. They're all coming in now. Okay, everyone look normal. Oh, hang on. I've got to go and do things. Okay, Russell, they're all yours as they come in.
Just let me know when everyone's here and I'll kick
Can
off.
you keep an eye on that, Mark? Because I've just realised about 4 people have bought last-minute tickets. I've got to go and process them. So I'm going to mute me, in fact.
Yeah, I can't actually see the meeting room because I'm not a co-host or anything.
I'll sort you out. You're now a co-host, Mark. Okay?
Thank you. I'll keep an eye on that.
So come on in, everyone, and take a seat. We'll be starting very shortly, probably within a minute. To get yourself ready.
How are we doing, people? We all settling in? Excellent. Excellent. Right, well, that's pretty well everybody in, I think, Russell.
Okay, thanks, Noel. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Event Horizon. I forget which number it is by now. I think we're in the 50s. Is it 53, I think? And if you haven't been before, Event Horizon is a night of science fiction themed entertainment. We call it a sci-fi cabaret of sorts. And tonight's Event Horizon is actually video game themed. So I particularly am excited about this one because I'm a big video games geek. I've been playing them since I was a little kid. You can't see my t-shirt, but it does have Snorlax on it for all you Pokemon fans out there. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what's going to happen tonight, and then we're going to hear a few things, and then we're going to get straight into the acts after that. So, first of all, we're going to have music and readings from some great talents from all over mainly Scotland, I believe. And then we're going to end with a round table with some of those speakers. So I want you to think of some questions, comments, or anything like that. If you do have them, you can put them in the comments, or you can, in fact, just wait and we'll put you on camera at the end and you can ask your question to one of the people involved or indeed the whole table. It's worth mentioning also that you are being recorded. So if you do not want to appear on YouTube or on the internet at all, then I suggest you just turn off your camera right now. And throughout the whole performance, please do keep yourself on mute unless at the end you're going to ask a question when I point to you, essentially. I'd also like to say, please do use the hashtag Event Horizon. And if you're on Twitter, obviously that hashtag applies. And also at ShoreInf if you'd like to make any comments and suggestions or anything like that, or you just want to chat about what you've seen. Tonight's event is actually sponsored by a few places. So Creative Scotland, Shoreline Infinity, and also the bid to host the World Science Fiction Convention in Glasgow 2024. So very thankful for all of those organisations, and the latter of which you can find out more about, and you can also support them at www.glasgow2024.org. Maybe it should be www.glasgowin2024.org, I believe.
No, it's glasgow2024.org.
Okay, they're two different things. And on Twitter, they're Glasgow in 2024 on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And I'll share those details in the chat as well. Shortly, we'll be hearing, obviously, from our co-host, Ruth Booth, who you've just seen, and also who is also the co-planner of tonight's event, as well as co-host. But before that, we're going to hear a few words from Shoreline Infinity's Mark Toner about an upcoming project. So I'll just briefly pass over to Mark, and then he's going to pass over to Ruth.
Okay, thanks very much, Russell. Yeah, just a wee quick announcement, see if we can get some of our Shoreline community behind us on something. And talking about behind us, I'm just going to move over a wee bit here and show you some fantastic artwork. What this is a picture from a book we're hoping to get published. This is produced by the comic artist known as SFF, who those who buy Viz and stuff will know about. He's also more often known by his actual name, which is Stephen White, and for that he's quite famous at the moment for illustrating a very nice version of Peter Pan. So he does quite a lot of stuff. But this is a kind of ongoing personal project of his called Milk, just capital M, capital I, capital L, capital K. And what happens is every so often in his career, Stephen brings out a copy of this sort of graphic novel, I suppose you call it, which just shows where he is with his art and his storytelling. And we're lucky enough to be involved in the latest version of that. So we're trying to get that published, and we're trying to get it published using a Kickstarter. So if you like science fiction comics and anthologies, if you're interested in the work of Stephen White or Streff, depending how you know him, you can actually help us with this, because it won't happen unless we raise £2,000 on Kickstarter. And we're going to try and do that on the 5th of November when we start this campaign. But in the meantime, what I'm looking for is people who are willing to help us with that to come and sign up for a mailing list, because what we need to do is get as many people as possible pledging some money towards this project on the 5th of November, so that the Kickstarter algorithm takes it up to the point where it's advertised to people who are regular Kickstarter backers, and that's people who've got the real money that can make this happen. Now, you don't have to pledge the £15 plus postage it would cost to buy the thing. You just need to get on there and post £1, just as a kind of a donation to get it started. And that would be enough to get, it's the number of people that are interested, which is the important thing. So if you would like to help us with this, and you can pledge at least £1 or 50p even, might even work. I'm just putting up a little address here on the chat. If you go and have a look at that page, there's a bit about what this book is about, and there is a link where you can fill in your name and your email address. That'll come to me. I'll put it in a mailing list, and I'll email you a few days before this thing starts to say it's coming up, and I'll email you that morning to say, could you just get on and do your pledge today, and then I'm going to delete the mailing list. It's only going to be used for this one purpose. So if you'd like to help us, give us your email address, and I'll let you know when to pledge. That's the first thing on the 5th of November, and we'll try and get Stress Book doing really well on Kickstarter and get it out to the world again with all the new editions. But this is just a wee sample. There's all sorts of fantastic artwork in this thing. It's really worth publishing. Okay, I'll pass you back to Ruth, and she'll carry on with the proper events of tonight, but just keep in mind that we're trying to do this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Ruth E.J. Booth. You may be, if you're a regular member of the Shoreline crowd, you may be familiar with my regular Noise and Sparks column in Shoreline of Infinity. But tonight I'm here, as Russell says, as co-host, and also in my capacity as a member of the Glasgow in 2024 bid team. That's the logo in the background there. So why have we decided to do tonight about video games? Why video games? Well, as you know, Event Horizon regularly explores science fiction and fantasy in poetry, fiction, film, theatre, graphic novels, and more. But this is the first time we've dedicated a whole night to exploring this medium. So let's get it out the way. It's become almost a cliche to begin any gaming special with an apology for its undeserved reputation as frivolous or even dangerous. But then constantly having to justify your interests is certainly familiar to any fan of science fiction or fantasy, whether in new media or old. But gaming offers genre something different from any other medium, in my opinion. Video gaming allows us to engage with science fiction and fantasy worlds, their characters and themes on a much more visceral level. For a short time that we're playing them, we step out of ourselves and into those universes. Those lives become our lives, their story, our story. Games allow us to explore not just fiction, but real-life environments and inhabit perspectives outside of the human. They give us tools to explore social issues, history, mythology. They can help make a real difference in society, whether, for example, in learning new skills, spreading cultural awareness, or even developing our mental health. And for many of us, they're intricately bound up in our lives. Sometimes it can take just a few notes of, say, Yuzo Koshiro's seminal synths on Streets of Rage, or Koji Kondo's Super Mario theme to transport us to some of the happiest moments from our childhoods. And that's why when Russell and I first discussed the idea of running this night in tandem with the Glasgow in 2024 Worldcon bid, what excited us most about this idea was the chance to bring our love of gaming and genre to you folks. All of our guests tonight work with one or more of the aspects that I mentioned within science fiction and fantasy video gaming. And tonight we hope that we can change that initial question from why video games to why not. Okay, so first up tonight, we have Theremin Hero, chiptune musician, thereminist, and Britain's Got Talent semi-finalist Theremin Hero, aka Greg Stewart, performs using the nostalgic sounds of the NES and Game Boy, with the addition of live performance instruments such as theremin, laser harp, and guitars made from retro video game hardware. Greg, are you ready for us?
I am indeed. Thanks very much, Ruth. and to Russell for this amazing event. And of course, I get to play the most sci-fi of all instruments, the Theremin, which is the only instrument you play without touching. And also a Game Boy, classic from 1986. So without further ado, I'm just going to mute my mic so I don't get feedback. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Theremin Hero. We're going to be hearing more from you later. You wouldn't mind just muting your mic just now? So great to hear those tunes again and remixed. It was awesome. And our next performance tonight is a piece of prose. And we're going to be hearing from Corey Brotherson, who's an award-winning writer and editor who's worked in the video games industry since 2001. He's currently a narrative designer for Silver Rain Games and the world's first Windrush video game, Windrush Tales, and has also scribed over a dozen stories in the comic book industry. So please welcome Corey Brotherson.
Thank you. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. So I'm going to read a little bit of prose from a graphic novel series called Magic and Myths, which myself and my co-creator Sergio Calvert have been creating for a fair few years now. And basically, for a little bit of context, it's been running for about 6 stories so far, and 2 of those are like the main ongoing series, and the rest of them are shorts or effectively spin-offs. So what I'm reading you is going to be a very, very small section of prose, which is actually a preview for the next season of Magic and Myths that we're creating at the moment. The story itself, on a whole, is about how myths can affect us and how they shape our lives. That's both classical myths and the myths of modern day as well. So that's where you'll start to see some of the video game references kind of creeping in. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work. And then, is that going to? Okay, let's try again.
Come on, work for my son. Yeah.
Hopefully that works. Mom, you're on live, so please take off the microphone and mute it. So I'm just going to read now. A pale, jagged fingernail bled a single, futile stroke down the wall. Varys squinted at his handiwork and sighed. His attempt to mark another day in the dank, stinking home he had once made a prison cell was yet another failure. The smudge of crimson was no clearer than the last few attempts to record what could have been months behind bars. The youth rubbed his eyes with blood-caked fingertips, his vision blotting in the dull light of a solitary torch far from reach at the stone dungeon's hallway. Varys sighed once more and slumped into the one corner left he had not soiled. A deep, growling chuckle came from the cell opposite. "Should have saved them, cub," said the large charcoal-coloured bear, his words barely finding their way through overgrown fur and long teeth. He held up a grizzled front paw, clanking decayed yellow claws against the metal bars. "Tooth and nail are the only things we can ever rely on." Varys closed his eyes and shook his head. "No. This, Byron," he tapped the dirty fingernail across his scruffy temple. "This is the only thing we can ever truly rely on." "Then tell me, oh great mage, how long have we burned our lives away here?" Varys did not open his eyes or mouth to answer. Byron chuckled once more. "Never fear, boy. When the hag returns, you can keep warm within her sagging tales of fortune, faith, and false things." "Months or not, I tire of you, beast," said Varys, keeping his eyes closed. A shiver ran down his spine, forcing him to pull his grey, rat-eaten gown tighter around his wiry frame. He could barely smell the odious horrors that lived in the remaining fabrics anymore, yet Varys pondered if he was worse or better off than Byron. After all, the bear's pelt may have kept him warmer in the frigid and cramped dungeon, but if Byron's fur smelled as bad as Varys' garb, well, at least Varys had the option of removing it. Acutely aware of his bare skin beneath his clothing, the boy pondered whether asphyxiation or hypothermia was a more painful death. Byron tilted his head, ursine eyes scanning the shivering human that sat meters away, separated by a safe distance of stone and steel bars. Then he turned towards the yawning darkness of what used to be the dungeon's exit at the end of the corridor. "She's taking too long." Maybe her ploy has fallen beneath his maw. When no response came from Varys, Byron snorted. If he means to eat us, then starving prisoners are poor food. A toothy grin flashed across the bear's mouth. Skinny boys are especially meager meat. A slow smile rose on Varys' cracked lips. Your boasts are equally thin. The young mage opened a single eye. Please, tell me once more of your magnificent kingdom full of gold and sunshine and powerful bears lining up to rescue you from a fate between an ogre's rotten molars. They never were too bright, rumbled Byron. I await a display worthy of your supposed status. Rat meat makes pitiful sustenance. Rat bones, even worse as wands. Varys considered his words for a moment and then added, Not that I'm ungrateful for the carcasses you have shared, of course. Byron's smile extended as once again tapped the bars with a demonstrative claw. But before Varys could have argued against the bear's repeated point, a small pixel of blue blipped into the cell next to the mage's prison. Then, several larger, darker pixels popped into view. For a moment, they flickered red, before returning navy and rounding off into a more familiar and natural-looking blue fizzle of electrical energy, which exploded into form, momentarily bathing the entire cell in harsh light. From it emerged a short, grey-cloaked and hooded figure, which collapsed into a heap on the stone floor. The figure flickered with more emerging blue pixels, as the hood warped from grey, tattered grey to a sleek white, eagle-beaked shape, seemingly misaligning and shifting before snapping back into place. With a pop, the pixels vanished, immediately reverting the hood back to its withered, scruffy grey. The boy and bear watched in silence as the figure untangled herself, extending a withered hand almost as grey as the cloak which hid it, to one of the cell bars and slowly pulled herself up. Then, a croaky female voice clawed itself free from an old, parched throat. You both bicker like malnourished fowl. Varys lowered his head in concern. What was that? Those blue bits of energy, your clothing, it was... The boy caught himself, adding more tone to his voice. Did he affect your magic? His only immediate answer was small, crackling sounds that accompanied the woman's attempt to sit. Varys bit back his first response, then his second, then took a different approach. What news from his lair? This time, the reaction was direct. We must act with haste. Tonight. Any attempt to hide the alarm in Varys' voice failed. Impossible! You said we had days before the dispel would be effective, to prepare a proper plan. The growl that came from Byron's cage contained far more menace. I don't take orders from you, hag. Then you are a fool as well as a toothless brute, animal, spat back the woman. Before Byron could bark his response, Varys spoke as pointedly as he could to keep the conversation on course. What happened to your ruse? My attempt to play Scheherazade could only last so long. Scheherazade? Beneath the darkness of her cloak, a tooth seemingly shone. Before your time, dearie. Byron slammed a paw against the metal of his prison. If I am to listen to your flapping, it will be towards a future where I have to listen no longer. Did your spell work on the ogre, witch? The woman sighed, the sound of air catching across the gristly tunnel of her gullet. Not as complete as I once planned, but there was a change in him as I narrated tonight's tale. An unrest. The ogre is still confused, adapting to his newfound ability. The woman's words were yanked from the air via a sharp convulsion that took her body, her entire frame suddenly blotched with red pixels. Her cloak crackled into crimson before settling into a deep rosewood, its ends hemmed with ornate golden embroidery. As her body shook, the colour appeared to leap off her clothing into square blotches hitting the rough stone flooring and seeping between its cracks. Are you? Began Varys, cut momentarily silent in shock at the visceral display. Are you being attacked? What is this? The woman shook her head, although the youth couldn't determine if it was her response or part of her ailment. Instead, helpless, he tried to listen to the barely audible words she whispered in repeated mantra. Nothing is true. Everything is permitted. Taking a moment between spasms, the woman took a deep breath and slammed her grey hands onto the cold stone. The colours, taken in by the cracks, lethargically creeped back up, trickling up her wrists. Another breath was taken, deeper this time, and she rose to clap her hands together, the sharp snap sound instantaneously reverting her clothing back to its desolate grey. The convulsions ceased. She took a moment to catch her breath. I admit my magic ails by the day, and while every step back he takes to understand the power he possesses, he still takes more steps forward than we have time to risk. Sensing Byron's irritation had started to simmer, Varys jumped in once more. It's not in his nature to command such magic. Which is why we must act now, said the woman. Magic which has been acquired by accident can be removed, and we are lucky that he still lacks the intelligence to monitor his prisoners. I fear this will be as good a chance as we shall get before we find ourselves in much greater peril than simply rotting. Byron allowed a humorless snort to escape his muzzle. And what if I say no? Varys' tall jaw tightened. Your timing for games is poor, Byron. Games bore me, came the deep voice reply. For days, maybe weeks, this one has left us each night to entertain our captor. Yet her weakened magical suggestions have borne next to no fruit. Maybe her words aren't even as powerful as she says. Maybe she works for the ogre, helping him. We know not even her name. Nothing. This time, the woman laughed. You and the boy know nothing of each other. These bars, they do not make you friends with him, she nodded towards Varys, nor me. To pretend otherwise is foolish. But I suspect the young one here has realized that if I could have escaped already, I would not be here. Same for you, despite your idle claims. And even if someone cared enough to look for you, they will not find you. Our fate is our own. Byron snarled, but no words followed, leaving the woman to continue. From the poisoned waters of rapture to the once golden spires of Anor Londo, I have wandered this realm, and more, for longer than you have been alive, pup. I have no desire to waste my remaining years in a broken ogre's dungeon. My grey skin will touch sunlight again. I offer you the courtesy to join me, not from a childish ideal of friendship or trust, but because I stand a better chance of escape with you both. You may be lucky enough to find your way out without my remaining magics, but how much longer are you willing to wait? And the story will continue in Magic and Myth Season 3. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Corey, for that. Obviously, a lot of really great references in there for those of us who spotted certain video games. Just to point out, Corey is also working on the first Windrush video game as well, Windrush Tales, and you can also find that on Twitter at Tales Windrush. Okay, so on to our next thing. I'd like to bring in Graham Mckellen, who is the lead game designer at No Code. So No Code is a Glasgow-based games development studio. Previous games include Observation from 2019 and 2017 Stories Untold. He was formerly a physics high school teacher before making the jump to games development. Graham?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen to get started. Can we see that okay? Cool, okay. Yeah, so thanks for having me tonight. It's great to see you and speak to you. What I wanted to speak to you about today was our game Observation. It was released last year, 2019, in May. And in particular, I kind of want to talk about the idea of player agency. And I want to kind of look at player agency in our game through a kind of lens of the relationships that are kind of front and center in the narrative that we were trying to convey. My brother, who's the creative lead and founder of No Code, was the writer and director on this project. And us in the design team, our kind of, just to give you a bit of context there, us in the design team, our goal was to really kind of work quite intimately with that narrative. There was a lot of back and forth on that, and really trying to come up with mechanics, a loop, features and nuances in the interactions that the player would make to amplify and help tell that story as best as possible in the kind of medium of game. And we kind of feel that Observation is a game, is a story that was best told as a game. So that's kind of why we kind of arrived at that. So first and foremost, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play a very short video, which is the kind of trailer video that was produced, just to kind of give you a bit of a feel for the game.
HQ, this is Dr. Emma Fisher on board Observation. I still don't know what happened or how I ended up here. There is no sign of the other crew. It's just myself and Sam.
Sam's systems are coming back online gradually as we restore power to what's left of the station. But that's the thing. Something has changed in Sam. I am different now.
Okay, so that was the trailer that we released about a year or so ago now. Observation is a narrative adventure game. The kind of unique, I suppose, angle that this game tells its narrative through is the fact that your character is the artificial intelligence that would have run the space station. So the space station is kind of loosely based on a sort of futuristic version of the ISS, and you can imagine Sam like a very advanced Alexa on that station who would be responsible for taking commands and running queries and helping the astronauts on board with their tasks and things like that. You assume the role of Sam at the beginning of the game at a point where an event has occurred. And you learn very quickly, essentially, that Sam has lost all memory, I suppose, and essentially starts the game on the same footing as the player, knowing nothing about what has happened and really knowing nothing about themselves. So, and I'll make a point a little bit later about why that is such an important relationship between the player and Sam. The viewpoint that the game is told from, obviously through your characters, through the station's cameras, which are these fixed rotatable cameras, which occupy every module on the space station. And at some point you can also jump into a little sphere, which is actually a real thing. It's a sort of drone that they use up in the ISS, they use for experiments and things like that. But we kind of weaved this story that you can inhabit that and move around the station a little bit more freely. And the kind of key tagline for the game is, "You're not on the station, you are the station," and that was our kind of that was our tagline. So the game runs as a sort of is obviously a narrative adventure. It's a mixture of exploration with puzzles, and you move your way through that narrative. And the important thing, the kind of first important point that I want to kind of talk about is the fact that it is very much a linear narrative, not branching at all, really. Well, there's some moments which you could consider branching, but if you take a step back from it, really, the story has a very definite beginning, a middle, and an end, and it has narrative beats that we want every player to experience. And we have threads and nuances throughout that story that we want people to, everybody to get. Which is interesting because quite often when we talk about player agency, which there's lots of different definitions it seems to be forming. I was looking up the internet about this, but it's really about the degree to which a player can affect the world, which is a kind of main thing. It's really your interactivity in video games, which is the kind of part of the reason why we play. How do you create a player agency where the player feels like they're having an effect on the world, but also have a linear narrative where you have a particular story that you want to tell, and you want to make sure that those story beats are met. And so that's always a problem. That's always it's always a challenge, let's say. And the way that we looked at that was about providing width in the game and in the narrative and in certain mechanics, but in the right places. Because what happens is, if you try to provide width everywhere in the narrative, what you've got is essentially one end of the spectrum is a sort of choose your own adventure. Everything, you can interact with everything. You can, all eventualities are catered for, which is sometimes seen as a bit of a sort of holy grail for video games narratives, where you give the player as much agency as you can possibly give, and they can weave their own stories. And the way that we looked at it is that we wanted to tell a particular story, but also have the player feel involved in that and part of that. Especially given who your character is. So we looked at providing width in the right places. I'm going to give you a little bit of a video here on a little portion of the gameplay.
The power is back, but the hatch to Universal is still offline. I need you to find out what the problem is. Sam, give me a systems diagnostic.
So what you're seeing here is something called response mode, which is where Sam can talk to Emma.
One is pressurized.
The problem must be somewhere else then.
So Emma can ask for information about the station, or ask you to complete a task, and you can respond using UI or objects in the world to form your responses.
Module UN1 is pressurized.
Pressure's good then. What else?
Module UN1 hull contact points to EAS3 are unresponsive.
This sounds bad. Okay, so the power is fine, but the hull connection points are misaligned. That we can fix. I can't get them open from here, but you should be able to reclamp the contact points from outside. Looks like you're going on your first spacewalk, Sam.
Okay, so there what you saw was just a little bit of a kind of a puzzle that's thrust upon you as the player. So these are the kind of, that's an example of one of our puzzles. And what was kind of being displayed there was Emma asks a question about the station. There's clearly an issue with the station, and you give some answers. Now, the first couple of answers that the player gave there were actually incorrect. They told Emma about parts of the station were absolutely fine. And then she kind of had some follow-on questions before you actually gave the right answer, or the answer that she was looking for. And that's just a kind of small snippet of the kind of width that we tried to give, where there's a definite kind of narrative beat that we want to hit there, but we're going to allow the player a little bit of width within that to feel that they're forming a bit of their own path through that narrative. And we work in the sort of failures of the player into the gameplay. So very quickly, I want to just talk about the two relationships in the game that are all important for trying to provide this width. So there's a relationship between the player who's playing and Sam, and this is an important relationship that we've tried to kind of maintain throughout the game. And then there's also the relationship between Sam and Emma, or player and Emma. Okay, so the player represents the kind of newly awoken nature of Sam. So very early on, you find out that something is wrong with Sam. It's really that you that is wrong with Sam. You are representing the kind of humanity, which is a new part of the kind of change that has occurred in Sam as a result of this event. That's established quite early on. So the player represents that unpredictability, that humanity, and that's seen through the interactions that you see with Emma. So first off, there's fallibility. So we allow the player to fail, and we weave failure into the puzzle design, kind of like what you saw, what was seen there. But there's many other puzzles where failure is a big part of it. At first, it's about Emma will respond with being angry at the fact that you failed and not understanding why you failed. But then that slowly changes over the course of time as she begins to understand what's happening. Empathy is part of what the player brings to care for Emma's situation, which wouldn't be normal for Sam in his previous state. And so that's brought up throughout the narrative as well. So we rely on that empathy for you to care for Emma to actually take you through the narrative. A lot of your driving force as a player is trying to help Emma, which wouldn't necessarily be true of Sam itself. And then there's curiosity, and this is a place where we really kind of provide the width, is allowing you to explore the station and in a sense sort of regain some of your memory and interpret what's happened on the station through your exploration, through documents that you scan, through things that you find and pieces of puzzles that you put together. We allow a lot of width there, which is sometimes off the beaten track. And then finally, the player and Sam are always in step. The knowledge is a key factor. We always try to make sure that player and Sam, the character that you play, are always in step in terms of knowledge. There's never a point, hopefully, that Sam knows more than you. So you're discovering things at the same rate as your character is. Now, that's not always true for narrative-driven games, because quite often you'll play a character in a game that has knowledge that you don't have, and you're surprised by the knowledge that they have as cutscenes unfold and bits of narrative unfold. Here you're seeing it through Sam's eyes. You are Sam, so you've got to learn things at the same time. The language that we use evolves over the course of the game. So at the very beginning, you very much talk like an Alexa, and you work with her like an Alexa, where she gives you a task and you respond. But that begins to get more free and less of a sort of her giving you commands and you responding to a more equal footing as time goes on, as your relationship evolves, the language evolves, and that obviously evolves with the game mechanics that we give you, the tool sets that we give you, the opportunities, and your ability to talk through response mode. We evolve those mechanics to ensure that the language evolves. And then emotionally as well, we're providing, the story itself provides the opportunities for you to feel for Emma, respond, well, not just for Emma, for other characters also, and respond to them and react to situations. And so, again, your human emotion is what you bring to the character, and you're given those opportunities, and those opportunities are responded to within the game, so they react to the way that you feel, even though we've led you that way. I'm going to stop there because I think I ran out of time. But yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to answer some questions at the end on this kind of thing. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Graham. That was wonderful. Loads of information there, and many comparisons, I think, to kind of novel writing as well. So I think it'll appeal to a lot of the writers in our audience and those also interested in game design. And actually, I hadn't realised that I have Microsoft Game Pass, and actually, I am currently downloading Observation. I didn't actually realise that that it was the game that you were talking about until just now. So I look forward to seeing that. And you can see from the chat, a lot of other people are about to go buy a copy. So hopefully that helps boost the sales and everything. So good luck with that. And next up, we've got Stephen Sexton, who, if you're into poetry at all, you'll probably have heard his name. Stephen, his book "If All the World and Love Were Young" actually won the Ford Prize for the best first collection in 2019. He's a 2020 recipient of the E.M. Forster Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and the winner of the National Poetry Competition in 2016. So please welcome Stephen Sexton.
Thanks very much. I unmuted myself in advance. I think I'm unmuted. Thanks. It is lovely to be, well, not with you, but with you in one way or another. And Russell and Ruth, thanks so much for having me. It is, yeah, such a thrill to hear everyone speaking. I'm excited to hear what follows too. I feel that I must provide a little bit of explanation. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll get to the poetry bit, which I'm sure is the bit, yeah, everybody's excited about. And Ruth, I was so happy to hear your kind of introduction, because it's exactly the introduction I feel that I have to do. You know, this, yeah, what's the word? I can't use a word like shame. It's nothing like that, but there's this idea of the, you know, the kind of frivolous aspect of the video game that's something else. So yeah, I'm very mindful of it, but thank you for reminding everyone that if you have to remind everyone. So I ended up writing a book. It's called This. As you might notice, the little coin there, it's very familiar to some of you. This might be backwards, but yeah, If All the World and Love Were Young. So I ended up with this. This is a book that has a poem or a piece of text or something like that for every single level of Super Mario World, arguably one of the most famous or achieved games of history. I started writing poems a couple of years ago that were largely about images. They were largely about paintings, photographs, maybe film a little bit, and grew tremendously bored of this. I just couldn't really do it anymore. And in a kind of mischievous instinct, I sort of thought, well, why don't I think of other kinds of visual images that you know, that I've experienced with? And the one that came to mind was Super Mario World. That one, more than any other, was the one that came to me. And part of that mischief was to do, you know, what Ruth was talking about, was to take something that might be considered let's say a lower form of art, some people might call it that, with something that is perhaps also perhaps considered very high art, i.e. poetry, and to see what happens if I sort of smash these two things together to see yeah, what comes out. So what I ended up with is what I think of really as a kind of translation of Super Mario World into poetry, specifically poetry in English. And you know, what this book is actually about is not really Super Mario World. When I was writing this, I discovered that, you know, while I was giving all this attention to the landscapes of Mario's world, to the conditions of his task, I wasn't really writing about that. I was trying to find a way to write about my mother's death, who had died a couple of years before I started writing this project. So it came to me as something you know, something of a surprise that was in fact what the narrative was that I thought I was talking about. So yeah, a lot of surprise involved. I guess what I ended up thinking, or what I like to think, is that I translated this game so poorly that I ended up talking about my own life, is sort of how I like to think about it. So there is a strange blending of me and Mario, and it's so interesting to learn more from Graham, for example, about agency, because I feel as though I've made this terrible and weird blend of myself and Mario. In fact, one of the epigraphs that I start the book with is "It's a me, Mario," in the sense that it is one of me. You know, it is one version of me is Mario. So what I'm going to do this evening, which I'm very happy to do, because it brings me nothing but joy, again, as Ruth suggested, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to read to you while you enjoy most of the first world of Super Mario World, Yoshi's Island. So as I say, a poem for every level. Most of the time, there is some actual description of the level itself, the landscape. I interpret it in various ways, sometimes literally, sometimes fantastically. But with this narrative of my own that starts to creep through it at some points. So this video is courtesy, and for which I'm very grateful, of this person whose name you can see. I don't know how to pronounce it. Slouchy, I guess. SCHLAUCHI, but I have borrowed from YouTube. It's a long play. So I'm going to read along with it. Some of the times these poems are quite short compared with the video. So if the poem ends, I'll just wait for the level to end, and vice versa. Okay, this book starts with a little note. I'm going to read that, and then we'll press play and see what happens. It's such a joy. I'm excited to learn more this evening, and thanks for being here. So, in the summer of 1998, when I was 9, my mother took a photograph of me playing Super Mario World in the small spare room in our house. My back is to the camera. The television was positioned so it faced out from the corner of the room where the wall met the patio door. To my left, I could see the garden along which a little river ran, and over the fields, a dense forest. To my right, there was the huge block of the television, which was already 15 or 16 years old. My eyes drifted between these two positions. Because of the flash of the camera and the glare of the television screen, it's impossible to tell which of the following levels I'm playing. The Super Nintendo is a 16-bit console. Put simply, 16-bit refers to how much memory the system can process at one time. I'm willing to learn if I'm wrong about that. Just seemed, I was enjoying my joke so much. Memory, Okay, let's just remind ourselves of the intro to Super Mario World, something that brings me nothing but joy, and maybe even a little music. Friend. I mean, Yoshi's effectively, a horse, right? Mario's kind of a cowboy, is one way of thinking about it. Little cactus, what joy. So I'm gonna let this play, and I'm going to read along. Okay, I've just paused this for a second, and then I'm going to press play because this part of the video is very short. So we start either in my house or in Yoshi's house, one of the two. Yoshi's house. These are the days of no letters. The magenta mailbox jitters out of the visible spectrum. Babies chirp in our holly tree. Mountains yield to the foreground. And sadly, again, they're beautiful. My friends scattered in the lowlands. The fire seizes in the grate. The smoke signals across the eaves say all I really mean to say. I have gone to rescue my friends. I'll think of you and you and you. Yoshi's Island 1. Here's spotted mountains and cirrus. Here's sloping plateau drawn down on carnivorous plants and no sun. Gold by the cherish underground. Fly agaric throbs everywhere with fire plants and dinosaurs. In these days new as tomorrow, there is joy to be recorded. The tender steps in other lands, all the flowers of the garden. My mother winds her camera. The room is spelled with sudden light. A rush of photons at my back, a fair wind from the spectral world. I remember myself being remembered, a little lotus, a cross-legged meditant for whom the questions floating in the air are for a future self to voice decades from now, who will return again and again to this room and these moments of watershed. It will be an adventure, I think. It will be an adventure. The future is cannon blasting. Yes, I must have dreamt this. Her voice narrows into dreams of such things. Ships sink at the edge of the world. Yoshi's Island 2. pixels and bits, their perpendicularity. One of the worlds I live in is as shallow as a pane of glass. The threshold of the window sets a frame around the holly tree, wild funguses slimy with dew and toxicity. The rubies of holly berries sing on the branches the robins hide among, and the veins of ivy vines wind around the slumping trunk and boughs, slowberries in the blackthorn and the carcinogenic bracken. Groundsels loiter along the low-dashed wall, the daisies loll about. One summer's day, I'm summoned home to hear of cells which split and glitch so haphazardly. Someone is called to intervene with poisons drawn from strange and peregrine trees flourishing in distant kingdoms. We take the air in the garden, bitter with berries and mushrooms too toxic to eat, where the grass bows in an unexpected breeze. Yoshi's Island 3. Today I climbed the highest mountain in this region. My singular wish was to see what its elevation offered. With one companion, my brother, who is no better or worse than anyone else, I saw blankets of mushroom fields, reducible to patchworks, what the bird's eye view must see of farms in Genoa. I went so far up the broken path, I supposed I should almost see the curve of the planet or the whim on which the waves begin. But for the first time in some time, I thought of our father at home, the sirocco in from the south, turtle doves in the huge wheat fields. Yoshi's Island 4. Salt water everywhere. Low tides undulate a flotsam of mines. The archipelago a swim with joyful blue-white pufferfish, and in a neighboring province, cigarro prowl a feline prowl. The ankle-deep children's pool on the peninsula buoyed us up aboard a heavy pedalo, the likeness of a giant swan, almost unmaneuverable about the tropical island, silly with plastic palms and shale, from whose hollow we called to land, to our mother on the seafront, between the artificial pool and the sun-struck coastal waters, who beckons us back to harbour. Since it's August, she begins the idle effacement of dying, the many prickles of needles, of many exotic compounds, hormones and corticosteroids, the stiffening of the larynx, mouth the dry of the walk alone into the desert, finding there those cactuses, their open arms and their long, curious shadows. Iggy's Castle. My dreams reply, the garden has become an ocean of lava, a precinct of spewing tephra, the rock like black honey folding over again impossibly. And yet, on a shaky island, someone stands surrounded by fire who says to go on without me. So there's a sound in the house when I wake, mice under the moon. My mother who cannot sleep halves a bright grapefruit, whose feet, whose toes, whose hands, whose fingers, whose ankles, whose head, she says, are on fire. Let's go to Donut Land another time. I'll let Mario speak for me. Thank you. It's a thrill to read you poems about Mario, and it's kind of fun to perform to Mario. That's all for me for now. I'm very excited to hear what's happening next. I'm going to press stop. I'm going to mute myself. I'm very excited to learn more.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. That was absolutely wonderful. I have to say, as someone who's working on a creative project right now to do with nostalgia around video games, it's been an absolute joy so far this evening to see so many creative responses to video games, whether it's poetry, prose, or games themselves in dialogue with past games. It's absolutely wonderful. And yes, I absolutely empathize with anyone who found that last level particularly anxiety-inducing regarding the all crushing things. Okay. So we've done a lot of creative exploration of video gaming this evening. It's now time to move on to the game studies part of the evening. Game studies is a term that's generally used to refer to research around not just video games, but RPGs, tabletop games as well. But tonight, obviously, we're going to be focusing on video gaming. So I'd like to invite the first of our guest academics, who's going to be talking this evening about their work, Gabe Elvery, who is an LCAS PhD researcher at the University of Glasgow. They are defining the digital fantastic in video games. They are vice editor of Press Start Journal and a member of both the University of Glasgow's Games and Gaming Lab and the Centre for Fantasy and the Fantastic, which has just started up at the University of Glasgow. Gabe, are you ready for us?
Yeah, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. So I've got to do the typical Zoom thing. Can everyone see my screen? Hear me okay? Fantastic, wonderful. So yeah, thanks again for having me. So I'm just going to speak about Animal Crossing New Horizons, COVID-19 and the fantasy of a normal life. So looking at Animal Crossing as a fantasy world. So it's easy to feel trapped in this era of Zoom fatigue, to feel like you're always working. When home serves as an office and there's little to separate work from leisure time, it can feel overwhelming. But what if you had a second home, somewhere you could arrange exactly how you wanted without worrying about how aesthetic your Zoom nook is? What if you had somewhere with a garden for planting near a river for fishing? What if you were actually allowed to go and have coffee with your friends or even stand less than a meter away from them? No, I'm not talking about Dominic Cummings' country estate. What I'm talking about is Animal Crossing New Horizons, which has served as a second home for many gamers during the COVID-19 pandemic. I first became interested in Animal Crossing because of my research on fantasy, affect, and video games. I'm identifying which video games have inspired outspoken affect from their fans and considering why the games are so important to their players. For those who don't know, Animal Crossing New Horizons is a fantasy video game on Nintendo Switch that invites the player to inhabit a digital fantasy island, along with a cast of colourful animal characters who have their own distinct styles and personalities. New Horizons has become so prominent because the game is being used as a social and emotional tool, playing a pivotal role in helping players cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. The importance of these games during this unprecedented time has been recognised by the World Health Organization, who have championed an industry-started campaign called Play Apart Together, which involves over 60 gaming companies. The campaign promotes video games as a means of connection to bring socialising into the digital space and lessen the temptation to mix in person. The WHO, leading the media with it, has finally recognised what gamers and developers, and we probably, have suspected all along, that video games can be a part of and enhance the well-being of those who play them. The pandemic hasn't revolutionized the way that players are engaging with technology, but lockdown shifting of the social paradigm has intensified pre-existing trends. But why this game? It's nothing new. Its gameplay is mechanically simple and follows the same pattern as early installments of the franchise. Its writing is minimal and its graphics unintensive. The tasks are repetitive and even mundane, but they're tasks of the player's choosing. In Animal Crossing, players are invited to indulge in the luxury of an autonomous life that has intrinsic meaning. New Horizons offers us the fantasy of comfort, stability, and of normality, not just from the pandemic, but of the social, environmental, political, and economic pressures that have plagued a generation largely unable to benefit from the privileges of prior generations that took it for granted. As Romana Razman of Glasgow Caledonian University so aptly puts it, the Animal Crossing world is the universe you've always wanted but can't get. Sure enough, in times like these, conversing with articulate raccoons seems a more likely prospect than experiencing that which we call a normal life. So thank you for listening. This is where you can find all of my information. I've got a blog which is creative nonfiction, and it's a hybrid that combines bits of my research in with kind of personal narrative and things like that. Sometimes I do Twitch streaming, and we've also got events coming up with the University of Glasgow with the Being Human Festival, where we're playing through Outer Wilds. And I've also got an event coming up at the end of November called Explorathon, where I'll be talking about parasocial relationships, getting the feels for digital characters, and doing a live playthrough where the audience can help make decisions. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Gabe, before you disappear, I understand this was originally a blog that you wrote. If anyone wants to read the full version, how can they find it?
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll drop a link along in the chat. Is that all right?
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, so that was the first of today's academic speakers, but we do have one more. Charlie Harbord, who works at Abertay University, as well as doing a PhD on RPGs as enhancing second language acquisition. She wrote a chapter in Digital Games and Language Learning and is an applied game designer in residence for Women in Games Conference. Charlie also co-founded the Kilted Otter initiative and translates game scripts and elements into Chinese and English. Charlie, are you with us? I know you've had some technical issues this evening.
At the moment, I'm with you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
And hopefully for the next 5 minutes, I will manage to stay with you. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen. So I'm Charlie Harbord, and one second. There we go. So I'm going to talk a bit about games and language. And so just like Ruth said, a lot of my research also fights against the idea that games are frivolous or a waste of time. And I actually look into how games can be utilized to help us. And so games and language is my thing, usually Mandarin and English. And I'll give you a bit of background towards that. So this is where I grew up, a very small farming community in the northeast of Scotland called Tullynestle. We had a lot of tractors, a lot of cows, a lot of fields, and that was it. So it seemed to me as a child, and definitely as a teenager, the most boring place on the world. And so I started playing games, which was the gateway to the universe. From there, I moved here, which is Fuzhou in Fujian province in China. Very small city in China, so only about 12 million people. To put that in context, the whole of Scotland has about 5 million people. So it was a massive culture shock. Also, very few cows and tractors in Fuzhou. So from there, I moved back to Dundee, where I live and work now. And I work here at Abertay University in the Division of Games and Arts Research for the School of Design and Informatics. And it's a pretty cool place to work and study at. So I'm the in-game project coordinator for In-Game International, and I do research. These are some of my publications. This book's coming out in April, which I'm very, very stoked for. But my research, part of it, I'm looking at, so avatars, perception and interaction. So how does someone else's avatar influence the way that you would want to interact with them in a second language? Who would you feel comfortable using that language with? So I designed these 16 avatars and did a bit of research on that, which actually was really, really interesting. But I'm not talking about that. Women in Games, I'm the applied games designer for their conference, which was also fun. But again, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about today is the Kilted Otter Initiative. As you can see here, it's an otter in a kilt. It does what it says on the tin. So I think this needs a bit more explanation though. So what? Who is it? Well, obviously, first, it's me, Charlie Harbord. Secondly, it's my colleague over in Colombia in South America, Sandra Castro. She's awesome. She runs a company called Tan Grande y Jugando, which means grown but still playing. And it's basically game dev for South Americans. And as you can see, their logo is an otter. And so when we wanted to combine forces for an evil plan, we decided to take the otter and put a kilt on it, and that was what we came up with. So it's a cultural game jam backed up by research. And when I say this, I mean, from next month, we're going out and we're going to research and give research packs to the game jammers. So my Sandra will be using Colombian indigenous languages, and from my point of view, I will be using Gaelic, Scots Gaelic. So our focus is on heritage and stories and culture and language, but more so on the heritage and the stories and the culture, because if I made a game in Gaelic or she made a game in indigenous Colombian languages, very few people would be able to play them, but we can share the stories and the culture. So what games that give an off the beaten track tourist experience, a glimpse behind the curtain. So I spent a lot of time in other countries learning other languages, learning other cultures, and I thought, what about my own cultural heritage? As a Scot, you know, I do very little for Scot. The game is supposed to be a conduit to share our heritage, but also to learn about and celebrate other heritages. It's all about inclusion. Promoting Indigenous people to be involved in each step as well. We will be going for myself, to the islands to speak to the native Gaelic speakers. For Sandra, they'll be going into the jungles to speak to the Indigenous people within Colombia. And they'll be encouraged to, take part in this. But also promoting women and non-binary people to take part, not to the exclusion of men, but to add an element of inclusion for everybody. And for that, Women in Games will be taking part in this event as well. We want to share culture. So this is one of the Indigenous Colombian people or peoples, and this is Scotland. We don't all dress like that, obviously, but there you go. But this is also about preservation of dying languages. So if you see in this map here, this is Colombia, and you can see out with Spanish, these are all of the indigenous languages that are spoken, which are sadly dying out as Spanish becomes the lingua franca. And again, if we talk about Scots Gaelic, you can see how it's declined through till 2001. Now, Scots is also a recognized language in Scotland, but we needed to focus on once we've picked Gaelic. But more than that, this Games Jam event is going to be a chance for everyone just to have a go. And we don't want to have people think that you can't take part in a Games Jam if you're not a programmer, if you're not... So many different things out there and different packages you can use. I'm not a programmer. I can't code for anything, but I use RPG Maker to make role-playing games. I use BuildBox to make 2D games because they do it for you. So more than that, we want everyone to get involved if they can, and just have a go. We're not expecting AAA, perfect games from you. In terms of ideas, Scottish Star Wars, bring gaming back to Scotland, and the same for Colombia, or a Scottish Assassin's Creed might be nice as well. These are big games, but they're always a good springboard to work from. So that's all I have to say, really. So thank you very much for giving me this chance to talk. And in the future, hopefully, you will be hearing some information about the Kilted Otter initiative. And I hope that everyone thinks about having a try and just jumps in with both feet and has a bit of fun. It's also, you can meet people. So
Thanks so much, Charlie. That was wonderful. And I think you've got a lot of fans here for the best name and mascot, certainly. Also, it seems like there's so many unique opportunities for games to cross these divides, and it looks like you're doing really great work. So please do share a link in the chat if anyone wants to get involved in the big jam.
Definitely.
So the kind of last portion of tonight, before we're played out by the Theremin Hero again, is a round table. So what we're going to do is invite back Corey, Stephen, Gabe, and Graham. And then Ruth and I are going to start off with some questions for individuals and then a group question. But we're going to move on to some audience questions at the end. So if you have a question that comes up whilst you're listening, then you can either type it into the chat, or if you want to say it on camera, we should be able to do that as well. So you might need to just sort of type, I want to do my question on camera or something, and we'll find you. But that'll be at the end anyway. So I'll just, hopefully all of our roundtable participants are ready. And Ruth is going to ask the first question.
Okay. Is everyone ready? Excellent. Okay, so our first question tonight is for Graham. Thank you very much for taking us through your thought processes behind the designing of observation, and particularly after having gone through the entire game, coming back and watching the trailer again, and picking up on certain hints that that you don't necessarily notice the first time through has been very interesting. Now, I think you kind of partially answered this during your talk, but a lot of horror games or horror-angled games that are set in space generally take the perspective of the crew, the human participants in this. What made you decide to put the player in the role of the AI for this story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was that was the birth of the idea for the game. Really, was having a narrative or having having gameplay seen through the eyes of station cameras, from that kind of fixed sort of standpoint, and then an interesting character to play, being through an AI. And I think it's just it's an interesting perspective. I think we've said before that AI tend to get a bad rap in science fiction. Where if they achieve if they become self-aware, then that's a bad thing and they're evil, and that's immediately the kind of go-to trope. But it was an opportunity to kind of, well, let's put the player in those shoes, and what does it feel like? So how do people react to you? What's that like? And one of the kind of first things is that you start with nothing. You essentially start with no knowledge, and you're restarted, and you're on the back foot as a result. Trying to understand where you fit in the world and what you can do and what you can't do. And that's a big part of the opening act of observation, which lasts for maybe a good hour or so. And the way I've always kind of pictured that opening act is like a big game tutorial where you're slowly learning your place, relearning your place, and learning what you can do and how to do it, and you're sort of just finding your feet again, you know. And,
it's interesting, kind of that the fact that you're playing this character that doesn't really know what's going on, but yet at the same time is able to move. So is essentially the space that you're moving through.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the kind of game mechanics we try to employ, kind of try to lean on what would a human do here? What would a player do? You know, a human mind try to do to work their way through these problems and puzzles. And then that obviously amplifies your character, because that's your character now behaving like that, which is different from the norm. And then the other characters, so the main character, Emma, they kind of, at first lone astronaut on the station, responds to that, and then the narrative is weaved through that sort of relationship and the way that you behave, you know. Yeah, so it was just a very interesting point of view that really it was the reason why No Code was founded by my brother. That was the game that he wanted to make originally. It was his idea. The idea was in place for quite a while before making the jump to before actually beginning to make the game. We went there was quite a process to go through before that, obviously, but it was the reason why No Code was founded, was to make this game initially, sort of thing. So yeah, it was an idea that was brewing around in my brother's head for quite a while.
Thanks so much, Graham. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is for Stephen. And Stephen, you must have been so thrilled to have won the Ford Prize. That's amazing. Well done. And you can tell why from the poetry. But your poetry, you kind of use Super Mario as a way to kind of discuss death and grief, which are quite common in poetry, of course. And poetry can be useful for processing and conveying or sharing emotion. I wondered if you thought that video games are particularly useful as emotional processors, and what drew you to Mario in particular.
Thanks, Russell, for asking. Thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, I have a complicated relationship with everything, but I mean, I guess there's an interesting way that I think that I ended up thinking about that kind of a question. I guess for a long time I was thinking, you know, I've written a book of poems that is largely about Super Mario. So I feel as though there's an obvious kind of narrative option that presents itself here, which is that of escapism. You know, the idea that there's a difficult emotion or or something that is traumatic or difficult to deal with, and so there's this sense of escaping elsewhere in order to deal with it. And I mean, that seems like one of the damaging kind of charges by those people in the Daily Mail or whatever who, you know, get angry about video games once in a while, that there's some, you know, you're sort of, you know, receding from society or something like that. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's entirely possible that you know, poems, say, or video games or any other technology, and I think a poem is a kind of technology too. I think it's perfectly possible that they can be comforting and they can provide emotional support and do all of that. I was never really all that interested in doing that. I mean, I think I was interested in trying to find a new way of talking about grief, and I guess on the idea that I mentioned I was concerned about was that of escapism. I mean, really, I was entirely the opposite. I mean, my feeling that I wanted to suggest was that, you know, grief causes you to find yourself in a bewildering world where things do look a little bit like other things that you know or used to know. It's never about escaping into that world. It's more like finding yourself somewhere bizarre and unmanageable and trying to get out of it again. So as far as I'm concerned, you know, this is a book that's about trying to get back to oneself, you know, a kind of period of your life before grief, you know, not about running away from it, trying to get back to it. And, you know, it just seemed, I mean, I guess my background is in poetry. I mean, I did so this emerged from a PhD, and you know, there's a particular genre of poetry, the pastoral elegy, if any of you find yourself reading poems, but its whole idea, certainly in my opinion, is is that it creates an unreal world. It creates an unreal landscape where, a bereaved person can kind of bring the person they're grieving back to life. Like they create this unreal landscape to put them into. And that seems like a really obvious way of comparing the world of Super Mario, which is an unreal landscape. It's fantastic, it's strange, you can't quite understand it. These seem like kind of comparable parallels, that things are very, very strange. And I'm reminded of one thing that I remember reading a while ago, but I'm almost reluctant to say it because it's going to make it sound like I'm trying to convince you of my dedication to these wonderful academics and all you wonderful thinkers of video games. It's only partly that, but there's a phrase that I found really, really useful by a critic called Peter Buse, if that's how his name is pronounced. But he refers to video games, certain video games, I think more than all of them, as completing the circuit of specularity, is his phrase. This feeling of, being a player, seeing yourself animating a character, and just have this strange circle where you see yourself being someone else, but being moved by the actions of you yourself. And just, feeling like you're someone else, which is one of these, or crucially seeing yourself as someone else. Yeah, why Mario? I don't know. I think other than to say, and I wonder if this is true for many people, I suspect it could be, Mario formed the very first parts of my imagination. I'm sure many of you might have this feeling where you could walk through a video game as though you were literally walking through it, like that you remember. And I think this is more possible with older generations of video games where the files were comparatively small, but that you could kind of realistically know every bit of a, pun intended, of a video game. You could know where everything is and it will always stay there. So I don't know exactly why Mario, except it was so familiar to me. It's as if I used to live there.
Interesting, this idea about pastoral elegies there, I think, Russell, yeah?
Yeah, and I'd say I love the idea of this escape into creating or returning to a sort of preferable unreality. Reminds me a bit of Eliot saying like poetry is the distancing of raw emotion. It's not necessarily the expression of it, it's the trying to get away from it almost. Yes. I think you can sort of see that in your work there. Thanks so much.
I think this quite neatly leads into the question that we've got for Gabe, which is about how a lot of people, as you mentioned regarding Animal Crossing, a lot of people find comfort in fantasy and fantasy adjacent narratives, particularly within games. Why do you think this might be? Is there something particular about fantasy that helps us explore difficult issues or deal with difficult times?
Yeah, so kind of like what Stephen was saying, I think fantasy in a way can be like a bit of a buffer between the self and experience. So in a way it is like getting away from, like that Eliot quote that Russell said, getting away from emotion, but in a way that's so roundabout that it, like if you walk around the world long enough, you end up back in the same place. So I feel like with fantasy, there's a lot of very real things going on in these games and in these narratives, but by putting them somewhere else and by kind of like the real and like the mimetic kind of acts like the skeleton that the fantastic is kind of transposed over. So it allows us to kind of relate to something in a way that feels very real and it feels similar to experiences that we have, but at the same time you can say that that's not me, like that's about something else. And it's also really useful when we're talking to each other and with the rise of fandoms and things like that, because people can work a lot out by discussing something else. And that's one of the ways that like issues can get discussed, which is why kind of representation and diversity is really important in games and games development as well, because it allows for the discussion of those wider issues, but perhaps in a way that's kind of like a bit less difficult to look at. It's like looking into the shield to slay the Gorgon. you get that the idea that the issues are there and they need to be confronted, but sometimes looking at them directly can be a bit painful. So the fantasy can kind of help with that.
I think we can all associate with that, right? As readers and players of games, this idea of escape and and processing. And yeah, I agree with you that it's always kind of coming back to it, even if it's subconscious on a level as well. Thanks so much. My final question is for Corey. And Corey, you write in so many different forms and for so many like ranges of media. And I was wondering, how do you know kind of which media would best suit a particular idea? Because obviously it could be a game, it could be a novel, it could be a short story and so on.
Yeah, if you look very closely behind me, you'll see a kind of dartboard, and I just usually get a ball and just throw it behind me. No, I am joking. It's actually a question that I don't get asked very often, and it's a question that I try to delve into. And what I think the key for me is what's the most impactful way to tell the story. A lot of the time, I do think generally in visuals. Which is part of the reason why comic books are like my main source of medium that I write in. But I do try to feel things out in terms of what is going to be the best experience for the audience. What is going to be the most impactful way to convey the key elements of the story. I mean, for example, when I wrote Devil's Trade, it's a prose story, obviously, but it's in the middle of a comic book series, which is a bit weird. There's a few examples, obviously, like Watchmen and Sandman, which use that sort of technique, and they're very big influences on my writing. But I chose prose specifically to help convey a certain perspective of the characters. So the characters of Varys and Byron are actually antagonists in the main first parts of the graphic novel of Magic and Myths. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to be able to conceal certain things within the prose, which are a lot easier to conceal in the prose by comparison to the visuals of a graphic novel or comic book. Obviously, some of you noticed that some of the video game references were there. There are probably about 7 or 8 specific ones, ranging from like Bioshock to Journey, for example. It's a lot easier to hide those little references in there by comparison to asking Sergio to draw the Journey hood, which is very, very obvious by comparison, for example. So me, when I write, some of the stuff is very much kind of like a sense of misdirection. It's kind of like, look over here while I'm doing this over here. And prose gives me that ability to do that while mixing it with other stuff. But on a whole, I think it's always about saying, okay, so what are the most important elements of the story that I'm telling? What are the elements that I want the audience to take away from actually viewing or reading or whatever the story, and which particular medium is the strongest way to present those particular moments. In comic books, page turn is really, really powerful. So I always try to think about that. For example, the lack of sound and the use of gutters and space, that sort of thing is really, really strong to use. In video games at the moment, where obviously you're talking about player agency and being able to put yourself in a position of absolute empathy with the characters that you're playing as. So all of these little elements there that kind of like end up kind of being dropped into the gumbo of my final decision before I start putting kind of like the words to page a lot of the time.
Thanks so much, Corey. That was really great to hear. And it also must vary also depending on your collaborators and things too, like who's available, even those sorts of things. Oh, well, he's busy this week, so we can't do that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I'm learning very quickly that as well, that video games have an exceptionally long tail. So if you want to tell a story, then you have to make sure that you're still telling something that's going to be relevant in 3 or 4 years' time.
Sure, yeah, especially when everything's moving so fast right now. Well, what we're going to do now is actually we're going to move to the audience questions. So if anyone has a question, it can be targeted at a particular person or a couple of people, or it can just be a general question and we can throw it at our participants and they can turn on their own mics and answer it. So if you have a question, then please just type one into the chat down there. I'll give you a few seconds. All right, Avery's typing one.
Russell, do you have any of your famous video game related puns tonight?
Oh man, I can't. My jokes are so good that I can't just come up with them on the fly. No, I don't have that kind of I really should have come up with some. I'm sorry to disappoint everyone on that. So I'll try and share some on Twitter later once I've had a think. Have you got any, Ruth?
And I couldn't follow the master, I'm afraid.
Oh wait, I do have one. Okay. How do you get Pikachu onto a bus?
Go on.
You
How'd
poke
get...
him on. There you go. Okay. All right, we have a question. Thank you. Since it's been typed, I'll assume that you'd like us to ask it. I'll ask the long one, and then we've got a shorter one from Andrew. So Avery asks, be interested to hear what brought everyone to working with or in games. We all come from such different perspectives, and it's always great to hear about people's respective journeys. And also Avery got distracted by how brilliant the joke was. So would anyone like to...
I don't think that's quite what Avery typed there, Russell.
Okay. It may have been how bad the joke was. But good question, yeah. Because I think a lot of people want to break into gaming as well, right? So anyone want to have a crack at that one? How did you get into gaming, or what's your background in
it? Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, I kind of came through an unusual, well, sort of unusual way. It kind of started with my brother, who's been in the industry for quite a while. And I was a physics teacher at the time. I'd been a physics teacher for, well, I ended up being a physics teacher for about 12 years. And invited me along to Game Jam at Glasgow Caledonian University, which is where, if you don't know what a Game Jam is, it's basically just where you get a theme and then you have to make a game in about 72 hours, 48 hours, depending on what the, what the competition is. So you just get like a word or a sound or an image or something like that, and then you make a game, And I've never, I was a gamer, but I'd never thought about making games. And this is 2013. So that's kind of where I kind of caught the bug. I got involved. Mainly it was just kind of like, at first it was sort of like paper design, coming up with ideas and mechanics and gameplay and things like that. And then I got a little bit involved in the engine that we were using, this nice little simple visual scripting. So like programming for dummies type thing. Yeah, we made a great wee game, and it actually kind of won the competition that we were a part of. And it kind of just got me sort of thinking about that and started on that road. And I didn't really get involved full time until Observation, but in Stories Untold, which was our previous game before Observation, I was working part time in that, so I'd be teaching during the day, and then at first it was like a couple of nights a week I would go into the studio that my brother had just started, and there was only like one or two others of us there, and would help out, and I'd get involved in like implementation and some ideas and puzzle design and things like that. And then obviously towards the end of releasing that, I was in a little bit more than once or twice a week. So we were kind of like heading towards the deadline. Stories Untold was interesting, but it actually already had the Observation was kind of, I think, already greenlit. And then we'd done a little game jam and came out with the first episode of Stories Untold called The House Abandoned, and we put it up online, and it went sort of like semi-viral. And then from that, we kind of got the go-ahead to make a little 4-episode thing in the 6 months that we had between trying to get the contract signed and all looked over and stuff, and actually having to start Observation. So we had a little 6-month window, and we just kind of went for it from there. So that's kind of how I got into it, really just through my brother. But yeah, caught the bug and just showing up for a game jam and just loving the process, the creative process. I love the line between creativity and tech and mushing them together and trying to figure out what you can make. I like that kind of area, to work with,
Great. So basically everyone should get along to the Kilted Otter game jam, and that could be a window in. And if anyone wants to follow in Graham's footsteps, that's great, Graham. Thanks so much. Anyone else on the panel want to talk about how they got into it? Doesn't necessarily need to be gaming, but why you started working with games or kind of taking an interest in them.
I can, if you like.
Thank you.
So I never ever knew that game studies was a thing at all. I studied, I did a bit of creative writing, but I studied English and comparative literature at Warwick. And when I was doing that, with the flexibility of choosing our topics, I chose to write about video games. And applying literary theory to them, not knowing that this was something that was done in general because game studies hadn't really got to that university yet. And then I ended up eventually, after lots of weird little jobs, doing the Fantasy MLit at Glasgow. And luckily, that year they launched the Fantasy Across Media class, which we have to thank the prior year for, because apparently they suggested it. And there was 1 week that was dedicated to video games. And I'd kind of always felt really out of place. And then all of a sudden, on the video games week, everything just clicked, and I thought, wow, I can actually do this. This is amazing. And so we're kind of really trying to build up the game studies community at Glasgow, and get stuff that people can get involved in. So we've got the Caledonian Studies reading group, which is like cross-institutional because of everything that's going on. And we've got a Discord for that, which is really cool. So we've just done a social, but we kind of like talk about different aspects of video games in an academic setting informally every couple of weeks. Then there's also the Games and Gaming Lab that do loads of stuff. So really we're trying to just kind of build the community and get people involved, which is really exciting to be a part of. So if you fancy any of that, always feel free to give me a tweet or a message and I can drop you a Discord invite.
That's amazing. Thanks so much. And I'm so glad to hear that gaming is getting much more academic focus now, because, well, for me at least, like games are, I think possibly the greatest art form. I don't think that's an undersell to a degree, because they involve so many different other art forms, and so it's just great that you're so heavily involved in that and encouraging other people into it. So thank you. I think we're going to move on to another question now, Ruth.
Yes, I've got a question here from Andrew that's open to anyone. I guess since Gabe and Graham have just had their turn, we can move on to someone else. But is there any video game story that you found particularly revolutionary? I guess this is a question about games that really changed things for you, that really gave you something different. Corey, do you have anyone you can particularly think of? Or?
Games that changed. That's a. I think I'm trying to think. I may have to come back to that one if anyone else wants to go first while I'm thinking.
I can give it a go. I mean, I don't know what I'm about to say, but I can start talking and we'll see where we end up. And it might be time where Corey could then speak, if that sounds like a fair way to do things. Well, I should say that I'm not as involved anymore as I once was with gaming. I mean, I can, if I could remember the surname of Scott, somebody who was the person whose house I was in when I first held a Nintendo controller, I could tell you that's sort of, like a moment in my life that happened. So the first moment changed my life. I suppose more recently, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I feel like I am, to you guys who are professionals and who are absolutely, devoted and intensely knowledgeable about the field. Like, I think I am to you what, I don't know if you know who Rupi Kaur is, but like, I feel like I'm fulfilling that kind of role of like, I really like video games. Like that's me. So I'm sorry about that. But what I did do recently was I like the games of Hideo Kojima, if that's how Kojima. I don't know how exactly one would pronounce his name. I really like those because they seem to be the really clear blend of seriousness and absolute madness, and that is a really that's a really important feeling for me, that you could, I mean, in my own case, that I could do something that is absolutely deeply serious, but also like, make it really weird and kind of funny and create this tone that is just, it's hard. I mean, it's got a hard tone, and, grief, for instance, is really hard. I had a great time playing Death Stranding is my stalling answer, which I thought was utterly insane, and I loved it. And I don't know, like, I mean, I started playing it just as the lockdown started. So in a world where we became dominated by well, not dominated by, nor should we have probably been strictly relying on Amazon, but the delivery person who brings stuff to your door, we can't go outside because we're frightened of the world outside. You know, what's fortune, I guess, to have all these things fall together, but a really uncanny experience. And looking outside the whole time and thinking, I remember landscapes, I remember slipping on stuff, I remember the real world. So I had a really moving experience playing that. I don't really remember much of it. I just remember the indignity of slipping everywhere.
I feel that there's that connection aspect that almost makes it like the flip side of the like if you weren't really getting into Animal Crossing during the start of lockdown, you were really getting into Death Stranding, I feel.
Sure. I don't know what even happened in that game. Like, I had a great time, but I don't know. I don't know what, I can't remember. I don't know what the Death Stranding was. It seemed very, very convoluted, but in a way that just doesn't bother me, you know.
I think that would take an entire Event Horizon to explain that. Corey, any thoughts?
Yeah, so I had several ideas. I mean, I've been playing games for a very, very long time, like from the Atari 2600 upwards, and there are lots of games that start to influence me. But I think one of the more memorable games that has stuck with me during the earlier stages was, I think it was like my third console, which was my SNES. And I played Earthbound. I bought that, I imported it from the States. And it was such a surreal experience having to play a role-playing game, a Japanese role-playing game, no less, that was set in this really trippy, surreal Americana. And obviously it was using the Final Fantasy Dragon's Quest kind of engine, as it were, but the way that they implemented the story and the way that they pushed the narrative forward in such a refreshingly new way was really quite potent, I think, for me going forward. And it's something that has been kind of like, I've been looking at that and looking back at that so many times to kind of say, oh, okay, how did they do that? How did they go ahead and actually create the story? And obviously the main writer of the game is an author himself anyway, but it was fascinating exploration of doing something exceptionally different within the medium. More recently, I mean, I'm noticing on the chat people are bringing up hey, PlayStation games, because I used to work for PlayStation for 12 years, like Horizon Zero Dawn and Last of Us and Uncharted. But actually I've been playing recently Return of the Obra Dinn, and it has been an absolutely fascinating way to convey a story. If no one's familiar with it, it's basically you play an insurance consultant on a kind of effectively going onto a ship, and the ship has been ravaged by deaths across the board, and you have a magic stopwatch essentially, and you have to investigate every single one of those deaths by using the stopwatch, which transports you back to the moment of their death through a freeze frame. And it's all told out of total non-chronological order, which is just an incredible way. It actually boggles my mind as to how they actually must have written that story. I think it was written by one person, Lucas Pope, I think it was. And it's such a brilliantly new way of telling a video game story by having the player constantly think about what has happened and fill in the spaces of what they haven't seen to create the horror of the deaths themselves, which you're only seeing literally one freeze frame of it. You're not seeing anything animated. It's just simply one freeze frame. It's an exceptional way to tell a story, and it's something which has probably caused Lucas Pope many nightmares in the process, but it's really very, very good way of telling a new narrative.
Yes, an amazing art style as well. Very interesting gameplay, and it's not like a space. It's not like set on a spaceship. It's what 17th, 18th century ship.
I think
sort
so.
of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. Absolutely interesting stories. The Return of the Obra Dinn. That's definitely worth checking out. Unfortunately, I know we're having an amazing discussion here, but we've run out of time for the question section. Yeah, sadly so. So what we might like to do is continue the conversations on Twitter or somewhere else a bit later on. But in the meantime, I think it's worth we switch over to our last set of the night from Theremin Hero, aka Greg Stewart. I think that's Greg coming through.
Yes, indeed, I am here. I've had a grin on my face the entire time. These talks have been amazing.
Fantastic. I can hear myself through your audio.
Okay. I'll try and fix that. How about that?
That's great. Just a quick question now. Obviously, you work in chiptune as well, and you said that you use a Game Boy, for example, to help create some of your tunes. Can you tell us a little bit about the tech you're using, just quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. So chiptune is really just any music that's made with old video game hardware, and quite popular is just the original Game Boy. You don't even need to mod the thing. You can actually just plug in a flash cartridge this is the flash cartridge here. It's just a cheap one you can get from China. Costs like 20 quid. And you can get a piece of software called Little Sound DJ or LSDJ. And that lets you compose music directly on the Game Boy. And people are making like drum and bass and like all this crazy new styles of music on old hardware, and that's kind of the whole point of chiptune.
It's an incredibly inventive form. I mean, obviously we don't have time to go that much into it right now, but if people want to find out more information about it, obviously we have your website, thereminhero.com, but where else will find out about new chiptune music and maybe even start making their own?
The great thing about chiptune is actually the community. So it's a really active community. And if you just go on Twitter and literally search for chiptune, you'll find shows that are regularly happening. So there's a couple of a couple of Twitter handles I would follow. Definitely one would be chiptune shows. So it says everything you need to know. And also a bit of chiptune. And that will give you a kind of feel of like who's active in the community and where the online shows are, because they're usually on Twitch, and they're made every couple of weeks maybe, and there's from all over the world. It's not just the UK. You've got actually Australia is really active, America is really active, all over Europe, Italy even is very active in the chiptune community. And also, if you want to learn how to make chiptune, there's some great tutorials just on YouTube. You can just search for LSDJ tutorials. There's one by Rocco W, which is like a half-an-hour video, and it basically guides you through making a track from start to finish directly on the Game Boy. You don't even need a Game Boy if you don't have one. You can literally use an emulator on your PC and just follow through the tutorial, and you'll know how to make chiptune by the end of it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And I guess it's time for your final set of the evening, so take it away.
All right.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
I think that's the only way I can really sum that up. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Greg.
It was a pleasure.
So we've just got the thanks really now and saying good night to everyone really. So Ruth, do you want to say thanks to our performers?
Yeah, tonight we've had Theremin Hero, we've had Brotherson, Graham Mckellen, Stephen Sexton, and of course Gabe Elwood and Charlie Harbour joined us as well. So thank you very much to all of you.
We'd also like to say thanks to the team who've been involved in putting tonight together. Obviously, a lot of work goes into putting a night like this together. So we'd like to thank Shoreline Infinity, which includes Noel on the tech and also Mark behind the scenes, as well as Matt and Meg at Glasgow in 2024 Worldcon bid for their support. My thanks also to Ruth, of course, who's put so much work into this, and not just the hosting, but all of the preparation for this and all the planning. So thanks to the teams there.
And thank you, of course, to Russell for ably assisting with this, for being so supportive of the idea from the beginning, and just for helping put on this amazing evening. But I've also got to mention our sponsors for tonight, Creative Scotland, of course, and Shoreline of Infinity, who have been putting on these events for years, and since it's moved online, have just continued to be absolutely fantastic. And then, of course, tonight, our special sponsors, the Glasgow in 2024 Worldcon bid. Don't forget that if you'd like to see us supporting more of these events, if you'd like to see more things coming from us, or you'd like to help bring the World Science Fiction Convention to Glasgow in 2024, all you need to do is head to Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Glasgow in 2024, or you can head to our website, www.glasgow2024.org.
And a final thank you goes to everyone who came along tonight, because of course we'd just be sat here alone if it weren't for you, and it would have been great anyway, but it's great to have an audience along, and such a great, lovely audience. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Shoreline Infinity, which is Scotland's science fiction magazine. We publish magazines full of great sci-fi stories, poetry, artwork, non-fiction and more. We also produce books and science fiction themed projects and events in our cooperative. If you're interested in any of that, please visit www.shorelineofinfinity.com. And finally, it's just a notification for next time. So on the 4th of November, we'll be launching Biopolis, which is a book of tales on urban biology with lots of readings from lots of very talented folk. So please put your hands together one final time to thank everyone involved tonight, and we'll see you again. Good night. It looks like most people have gone. Just a personal thanks from me to all of you, especially all of you who performed and read. I thought it was brilliant. I think it was the best event Horizon yet. I'm a big gamer.
I completely unbiased, of course, in agreeing in that. But I've seen a lot of Event Horizons, and this is definitely in the top 10. This was absolutely amazing. We should really do some more stuff like this in future, I think.
Yeah, it was actually awe-inspiring. I really learned a lot this evening as well, and I thought the Theremin man was amazing. Greg, if you're still online, well done. It's fantastic.
We have him as our house man.
Sign him up quick.
Yeah. Greg, we may have to keep your name on our files. Fantastic.
Great.
But it's good to have all these contacts as well with academia as well as the kind of creative side, and with Corey and everybody, because
I'm partly glad that I got a chance to do my whole learning about craft thing in particular with Graham's talk. Really interesting, particularly as recently I watched an entire playthrough, and just sort of picking up on the little things about how you sort of guide someone through a narrative was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if
everything
you're
was
kind of
great.
thinking, yeah.
I'm probably going to have to rewatch it actually, because when you're hosting or when you're involved in an event, you kind of don't quite follow everything because you're kind of thinking of the next thing and so on. But this is all
Thank you,
online,
Charlie.
so we can share this. If anyone's missed it or you want to show bits of it, then it'll all be available online right now.